Hey guys, I am back and it's time to read some more of Found by Margaret Peterson Haddix. Last time we read, Chip and Jonah and Catherine were all at the library meeting with Angela Dupree, who witnessed the mysterious appearance of the plane full of babies. And she is pretty sure that the plane was not originally full of babies and instead was full of adults who were taking part in a time travel experiment and then through some kind of time travel accident got turned into babies. So she thinks that Chip and Jonah and all those other kids are from the future. So I'm super excited to see if she's right, to see what Chip and Jonah think, because we haven't heard their opinions on that theory yet. So we're going to pick back up with chapter 19. Silence. Dead silence. Jonah wasn't really even thinking about what Angela had said, because it was too bizarre and incredible to consider. It was like his brain shut down, rejecting her theories so completely. After a few moments, he thought to look at Chip and Catherine to see how they were reacting. Mostly, he was concerned that they'd all be rude and mocking and mean to Angela, when clearly she was just a nutcase. Oh sure, she seemed fairly reasonable at first, except for being scared to talk on the telephone, but believing in time travel and babies aging backward? Insanity. Chip and Catherine both had their mouths open already, though. Chip's might have just been hanging open in shock. Well, thanks for meeting with us, Jonah said quickly, hoping he could get everyone away from Angela before Catherine had the chance to speak. Your ideas are, very interesting. He was struggling for words, trying to think of a polite excuse to leave. Could he carry off, oh my, look at the time? Suddenly, something slammed into the glass door next to Jonah. Instinctively, Jonah grabbed for the door handle, but it was too late. A man was wedging his heavily booted foot between the door and the glass wall. The rest of the man's body was sprawled out on the ground because another man appeared to have tackled him. "You can't do this," the tackler was screaming. No, not exactly screaming. He was keeping his voice down, barely above a whisper, but his words still echoed with fury. "Not here. Not now. You'll make a scene. Do you want to ruin time completely?" Jonah shoved against the man's boot. He drove his shoulder against the door, trying to shut it against the man's ankle. He couldn't see the man's face because the tackler blocked his view. Then, the tackler turned, and Jonah could at last see him clearly. A jolt of recognition flowed through his body. He was so stunned he almost let go of the door. The tackler was the janitor from the FBI, the one who had told Jonah to look at the file on Mr. Reardon's desk. "Jonah, Chip, run!" the tackler called urgently, struggling with the man in the boots. What good was that? There was nowhere to run to, except out the door where the men were fighting. The booted man reared up, almost breaking the tackler's grip. Catherine shrieked. "The window!" Angela said. She rushed over to the outer wall and began tugging on the window handle. Chip jumped up and helped her. The window opened inward, making a narrow V with the wall. Chip dived out through the small space, barely missing landing in a holly bush. Catherine followed him quickly, executing a gymnastic-like move at the end, where she flipped over onto her feet. "Jonah, come on!" she yelled in through the open window. Jonah looked back at the men struggling on the ground. What would happen if he stopped holding the door? "Go!" the tackler called over his shoulder. Jonah ran for the window, skirting the table. He looked back once and saw that the men had rolled into the conference room. He still couldn't see the booted man's face, but he had a general impression of bulk, of muscles. He wasn't sure the tackler could hold him. "You go first, Angela," Jonah said. The name seemed to trigger a reaction in the tackler. He jerked his head back, looking over the top of the conference table. "Angela Dupree," he called. "We have wronged you in time. We owe you—" The tackler's head suddenly disappeared beneath the table. The booted man must have turned him down. There was a sound like someone's head clunking against the floor, and the table lurched sideways. "Angela?" Jonah urged. He held out his hand to help her out the window. She was wearing a skirt. She probably wouldn't want to go head first. Angela drew back. "You go on," she said. "I've been waiting 13 years for something like this. I'm going to stick around and get some answers." "But they're dangerous," Jonah protested. He couldn't see the men at all now, but he could hear them, grunting and punching and slamming into the chairs and the table. "Probably. That's why you need to get out of here," Angela said. She pushed him toward the window. He grabbed onto the frame, spreading his fingers against the glass to brace himself as he slid his feet out. "Go, Jonah," the tackler called from beneath the table. "Hurry, and Jonah, I saw your note. You have to be careful. Careful where you leave anything that could be seen later, anything that could be monitored." That was all Jonah heard, because he was out the window now, and the tackler was still using that low voice of hushed urgency. Jonah looked back, and he could see the tackler clearly now, under the table. He had one hand pressed into the other man's hair, holding his head down. With his other hand, the tackler was frantically waving Jonah away. His mouth formed the words, "Go, go now," but Jonah couldn't really hear him. Jonah spun around and ran. He quickly caught up with Chip and Catherine. Without even speaking, all three of them ran for the bike rack, scooped up their bikes, and took off, pedaling furiously. They were halfway down the bike path before Jonah's mind kicked into gear, letting him think again instead of just acting on reflex. He immediately slammed on his brakes. Chapter 20. Catherine was the first to notice that Jonah wasn't keeping up, that he wasn't pedaling hysterically toward home alongside her and Chip. "Jonah," she called over her shoulder from several bike lengths ahead. "What are you doing?" "I have to go back," he yelled. "We can't just leave Angela like that." "But she's a grown-up. She told us to go." This was Chip arguing now. Jonah decided he didn't have time to stand there and argue. He whirled around and began pedaling back toward the library just as desperately as he'd been pedaling away from it. Grown-ups can get kidnapped too, he thought, and she's a little nutty. She'd probably trust anyone who pretended to believe her crazy theories. Her theories are just craziness, aren't they? Jonah couldn't think about that right now. He focused on trying to pedal faster. By the time he reached the library, his legs were aching and he was gasping for air. He dropped his bike on the sidewalk and slipped in the door just ahead of a mother pushing a baby stroller and holding a toddler's hand and taking infuriatingly slow steps with a play-by-play commentary. "That's right, you push the button for the automatic door opener and then the door will open," and Jonah dashed through the lobby, past the checkout desk. "Young man, no running in the library." It was the librarian, one of the women his mama always said hello to when she stopped in. Jonah thought maybe this librarian had been in charge of story hour when he and Catherine were preschoolers. The conference room, men fighting, danger." That was all Jonah could manage, with his lungs threatening to burst. To her credit, the librarian stopped yelling and sprang into action. "Show me," she said. She rushed along beside Jonah, practically running herself. They dashed through the stacks, past the magazine section where Catherine had hidden before, past the nonfiction shelves with all the thick books about taxes. Then, finally, Jonah could see into the conference room, and it was empty. "Angela?" Jonah called. He pushed his way into the conference room. Not only was the room empty, but all the chairs were lined up perfectly around the table, and the table was exactly centered in the room, as if it had never been knocked off kilter by struggling men. The window was closed. The only sign that anything had happened here was a smudge on the glass wall, probably Jonah's own fingerprints smeared against the glass when he scrambled out the window. "Just what did you think was going on in here?" the librarian asked. She had her eyebrows raised doubtfully. Just then, Jonah saw a movement out the corner of his eye. He turned his head to peer out the window, and there was Angela. She was walking briskly through the far end of the parking lot. "That's the woman," Jonah exclaimed, "the one who was in danger." While Jonah was watching, Angela stepped into the cluster of pine trees on the other side of the parking lot. She turned and lifted her hand in a way that may have been a wave at Jonah, and then she just vanished. Jonah hadn't known it would look like that. He'd heard Catherine's description of the janitor appearing and disappearing. He'd heard Angela's description of the plane doing the same thing, but he hadn't understood how strange it would be, how it would set every nerve in his body on edge and make him question all sorts of basic tenets about how the world worked. Could gravity be tampered with too? Could time? Jonah blinked and stared and stammered, but, and then he at least had the sense to shut his mouth, because the librarian was looking at him oddly. Already, his brain was just trying to supply explanations for him. "She just stepped behind a tree. You just blinked and thought you saw something odd." The same kind of explanations he'd tried to use to account for Catherine's story, for Angela's. The kind of explanation anyone else casually glancing out a window would have accepted without a second thought. But his glance had not been casual. He knew he hadn't blinked, not while Angela was disappearing. He understood now what Angela had meant when she said, "I know what I saw. I trust my own eyes." The scene had been clear and distinct, and he had really seen Angela vanish into thin air. "Where is this woman?" the librarian asked. "I don't quite see—" "She's gone." The librarian narrowed her eyes at him and tilted her head suspiciously. "So, what was this?" she asked. "A dare? Your audition for drama club? If so, I heartily recommend you for whatever part you're trying out for, because you really had me convinced. You had me running in the library." "I wasn't lying," Jonah protested. "There really were two men in here fighting, and they seemed dangerous, and—" The librarian tapped her chin, her eyes narrowing further. "How did you see what was going on in this conference room before you ran in the front door?" she asked. Through the glass, from outside," Jonah said, which did have a grain of truth to it. Still, his words came out sounding like a question. "Someone did mention they thought they heard a girl scream back here, but we thought it was just one of those computer games." The librarian seemed to be talking mostly to herself. She reached out and grabbed Jonah's arm. "Come with me. We'll do a search through the library, and you tell me if you see either of those men." Meekly, Jonah let himself be led back through the magazine section, Past the row of computers, past the reference desk, through the little kid section where the mother with the toddler was asking with exaggerated patience, "What will it be, Curious George or the Cat in the Hat?" In the YA section, some kids from school were playing on computers, and they pointed and giggled when they saw Jonah being paraded around, his arm trapped in the librarian's grip. "I don't see either of the men now," Jonah said, his face burning with shame. He just wanted to get out of the library, away from the librarian. He could see Chip and Catherine standing hesitantly by the front door, as if they weren't sure if they needed to come in and rescue him or not. The librarian let go of his arm. "I think you did see something," she muttered. "You really were looking carefully for those men." And Jonah had been. Even when the kids from school had been laughing at him, he had made sure he peered down every aisle behind the bookshelves, every nook of the little kid reading area. The men were nowhere in sight. "Oh well," Jonah said, trying very hard to keep his voice from shaking. "Nothing's wrong now. Can I just go?" The librarian regarded him thoughtfully. "Go on then," she said. Jonah could feel her eyes on him as he went to join Chip and Catherine. Walking out the door, he felt robotic, because his body was doing something so normal, one foot stepping in front of the other, hands held out to shove against the door, while his mind was zipping and zooming and alighting on one strange thought after the other. "What happened?" Catherine asked. "Is Angela okay?" "Angela..." Jonah had to struggle so hard to focus his mind, to concentrate on the one precise moment of memory that his brain kept trying to transform into something normal and acceptable, something that would fit with everything else he already knew about the world. He wouldn't let his brain do that. He wouldn't stop trusting his own eyes. "I saw Angela," Jonah said. "I don't know if she's okay or not. I think she went into a time warp." Chapter 21. "Not you, too," Chip complained. "I'm sorry," Jonah said. He bent over, bracing his hands against his knees, trying to pull more air into his lungs, a delayed reaction to all his frantic pedaling and running. As soon as he could, he looked back up at Chip. "I'm not sure that's what happened. I'm not sure of anything anymore. But I think that's what happened, because it makes the most sense." "The most sense?" Chip repeated in amazement. "That's the best explanation you can come up with? A time warp?" "You didn't see what I saw," Jonah said. The edges of his vision were a little blurry, even now, but this was a normal feeling. Oxygen deprivation, his mind automatically labeled it. He felt the way he did after he'd played an entire soccer game as a midfielder, running up and down the field for a solid hour. He'd felt this way after the soccer game this morning. "Oh, geez," he thought. "I played that soccer game and then I rode my bike like a maniac. No wonder I feel so dead. No wonder I'm seeing things. I mean, not seeing things. Seeing someone vanish. Or, wait, maybe she wasn't really there in the first place?" His thoughts got so tangled that his mind gave up trying to revise the memory of seeing Angela vanish. It had happened. Period. "Catherine," he gasped, "when you said you saw the janitor disappear, I shouldn't have made fun of you. I didn't know." "You believe me now?" Catherine asked. "Why?" Comprehension dawned on her face. "Angela disappeared, didn't she? And you saw it?" Jonah nodded. "I'll show you." He started to stumble over something. It was his own bike, where he dropped it in the middle of the sidewalk. He picked it up, and then it was nice to have the handlebars to lean on as he led Chip and Catherine through the parking lot, over to the cluster of pine trees. He dropped his bike again by the curb. "She was right here," he said, stepping into the pine needles. "I saw her, and then she took one step forward. He took a step, and she was gone." Jonah rocked back on his heels, stepped forward again. He felt nothing different in either place. There was no temperature change, no wind howling furiously around some time portal. In both spots, before his step and after, he just felt a gentle breeze, the sunshine warm on the back of his neck, the pine needles soft beneath his feet. "Guess the time warp only wanted Angela, not you," Chip said mockingly. But there was an edge of fear in his voice. "Or someone's protecting you," Catherine said. Jonah looked at his sister. She was in the middle of pulling her hair back, capturing it in a ponytail. Jonah was surprised to see how red her face was. She had a ring of sweat where her bike helmet had pressed against her head, and the sweat was trickling down her cheeks. He was amazed she was willing to be seen in public like this. "Didn't you notice," she began, in an oddly strangled voice, "how, when those men were fighting, the cute janitor guy yelled out, 'Jonah, Chip, run'? He didn't say my name. He didn't say Angela's." "You think those guys were fighting over us?" Chip asked. "Why not you too?" "You're the babies from the plane," Catherine said. "I'm not." Jonah thought about this. The fight and the fleeing had happened so fast, all he had were jumbled images in his head. But the janitor, tackler, had seemed to be trying to protect them. "How did he know our names?" he asked. "Mine, I guess, from Mr. Reardon's office, but Chip's?" He remembered something else. And he did recognize Angela. I don't know if you two heard because you were out the window already, but he called her Angela Dupree. And he said, it was such a struggle to remember. Something like, "We have wronged you?" No, "We have wronged you in time. We owe you." In time? Chip whispered. Catherine sat down on the curb, her elbows propped on her knees, her face caught in her hands. That whole plane thing did kind of ruin Angela's life, she said. I mean, refusing to talk on the telephone, having everyone think you're crazy. Chip sat down beside Catherine. What does the janitor guy have to do with the plane? He asked. And who was the guy he was fighting with? What did he want to do to us? Jonah stiffened. Beware, he quoted. They're coming back to get you. That's what the letter said. That's who they were warning us about. He looked around frantically. What if the man tried again, sometime when no one was around to protect them? Catherine shook her head, her ponytail flipping back and forth. Really, she said disgustedly. If the cute janitor wanted to warn you, he should have provided a few more details. Names, dates, something you could go to the police with. The police would never believe this, Chip groaned. I don't even believe it. Jonah could feel the sweat rolling down his back, but it wasn't leftover sweat from all his biking and running. It was new sweat, panicky sweat, proof that his body thought he should be completely terrified. Well, here's what we need to do, Catherine said, tossing her head emphatically, her ponytail whipping out behind her. We need to call all the other kids on their survivors list again and see if they've had any experiences with some guy trying to catch them or some other guy trying to protect them. We need to gather some data, see if any of them have ever seen someone just vanish into thin air. And we need to warn them, to let them know what we know. But we don't know anything, Chip said. We know about the plane, Catherine said. We know where Angela thinks the plane came from. We know what janitor boy looks like. We know what one of your letters means. Tallied up that way, Catherine's plan almost sounded reasonable. She sounded as calm as Mom always did, dealing with a crisis. One time, when Jonah was little, he dropped a glass and it had shattered on the kitchen floor, and Mom had been there immediately, telling him in her most soothing voice, Yes, Jonah, I see there's glass all over the floor, and I see that you're barefoot, and that is a little scary, but if you just stand there like a statue, I'll pick you up and you'll be fine, and then I'll sweep up all the glass. Jonah had escaped without a single cut. If Catherine could master that same voice now, he was willing to let her take control. All right, he said. Chip shrugged. Whatever. All three of them retrieved their bikes and began walking them back toward the bike path. Chip and Catherine hadn't played a soccer game or pedaled quite as frantically as Jonah had earlier, but neither of them seemed any more eager than he was to speed home. They rode slowly, each of them stopping at various points to say, if there really is such a thing as time travel, or if we really are from the future, or if that plane really was a time machine. None of them seemed capable of making a complete sentence, of following any of the ifs to a logical conclusion. That's because there aren't any logical conclusions, Jonah told himself. He had read time travel books, he'd seen time travel movies, and they'd always seemed wrong to him. Couldn't the people just keep going back again and again and again, keep changing time until it turned out the way they wanted to? And there was some paradox he remembered hearing about, something about a grandmother. Oh yeah, time travel had to be impossible because otherwise you could go back in time and kill your own grandmother. But if you killed your own grandmother, then you wouldn't exist, so you couldn't go back in time, so your grandmother would be alive again, but then you would also exist again, so you could go back and kill your grandmother, but then you would never be born. Jonah's head just hurt just thinking about it. They reached Chip's house and actually parked their bikes neatly in the driveway. Even though they'd ridden slowly, Jonah was still drenched with sweat. Hey, I'm really rank, he said. Unless you want me stinking up your whole basement, I better take a shower before we start calling people. Catherine sniffed. Ugh, me too, she said. She didn't have Mom's authoritative voice anymore. She just sounded embarrassed. Okay, Chip said, but hurry back. He sounded like he didn't want to be left alone, but he was too ashamed to say so. Jonah and Catherine took their bikes back to their own garage. You can have the shower in Mom and Dad's bathroom, Catherine said, not quite looking at him. This was a gift on her part, probably a sign that she felt sorry for him, because Mom and Dad's bathroom was bigger and nicer than the one between his and Catherine's rooms. Usually, she'd dash into the better bathroom ahead of him, slamming the door shut, pounding the lock, and shrieking, Ha ha ha! Beat you! You snooze, you lose! Thanks, Jonah mumbled. He didn't care about where he took a shower right now. In the shower, he stood under the pounding spray for a long time after he'd soaped and rinsed off. The hot water felt good, even though Mom and Dad were always nagging about them not wasting water and energy. You kids should be concerned about the future, Mom always said, because you're going to have to live there. Oh no, Jonah moaned. Was that what this was about? In so many of the time travel books and movies he'd seen, people came back from the future to warn about global warming or stuff like that. What if he and Chip and the other kids were supposed to deliver some message about how people needed to make big changes now to save the world in the future? Lots of people are already talking about global warming, he said aloud, even though he wasn't sure whom he was talking to. Nobody's going to listen to me. Also, if this was an environmental thing, what were the two sides fighting over? Did the janitor just want him to stay here to deliver his message? Did the other guy want the world to end? Jonah wasn't enjoying his shower anymore. He shut off the water, stepped out, and pulled a towel from the rack. Distantly, he heard the phone ringing. Then, it stopped ringing. Dad must have gotten up from watching the Ohio State game to answer it. Jonah knew Catherine would still be in the shower because she always took forever. Then, she always had to spend another eternity drying her hair. She'd be doing well to make it back to Chip's house before midnight. "Jonah?" It was Dad shouting up the stairs. "Chip's on the phone. He says it's urgent. Can you get the phone up there?" "Sure," Jonah said. He wrapped the towel around his waist and went for the phone in his parents' bedroom. "Got it, Dad," Jonah yelled. He heard the click that meant Dad had hung up downstairs. "Hello?" "They're gone," Chip said, his voice cracking. "What's gone?" "The lists on my computer. The survivors list, the witnesses list, the files where Catherine and I were keeping checklists about who said what. It all disappeared. But the rest of the computer is fine." "How could that be?" Chip's voice arced toward hysteria. "Calm down," Jonah said. "Maybe you just deleted something by mistake. Did you check in the delete file?" "Not there." "Didn't you have everything backed up?" Silence. Evidently, Chip didn't. "But you made printouts," Jonah reminded him. "I left them at the library," Chip groaned. "I didn't get them back from Angela before we climbed out the window." "Did you pick them up? Did Catherine?" Jonah thought about this. He could remember the papers lying on the table in front of Angela, right before the first man slammed against the door. What had happened to the lists after that? When he'd run around the table to get to the window, had the breeze lifted the pages slightly into the air? After he'd climbed out the window and glanced back, had the papers been sliding across the table as the fighting men jolted it from below? Why hadn't he paid more attention? And why hadn't he simply grabbed the papers as he ran? "There wasn't time," Jonah said, his voice unnecessarily surly. "Maybe if I call the library," Chip said desperately, "maybe somebody found them?" "Don't bother," Jonah said. "They weren't there when I went back." He was sure of that detail. "Do you think Angela took them?" Chip asked. Jonah shrugged, forgetting that Chip couldn't see him. "What good does that do us?" Jonah said. He didn't want to speculate about where Angela might have gone with the papers. A new thought occurred to him. "Doesn't Catherine still have all the pictures stored on her cell phone?" "She deleted them after we downloaded everything," Chip moaned. "She said they took up too much space, and she was worried your parents might see them because sometimes your mom borrows that phone." That was true. Mom had been having trouble with her own phone battery. Some of Chip's despair was beginning to infect Jonah. "Then we don't have anything left from those lists at all?" Jonah asked, his own voice edging toward panic. "Nothing?" "I still have Daniela McCarthy's phone number on my cell," Chip offered. "But no one else's?" "I used our home phone for everyone else," Chip said. "Catherine told me I was being mean, trying to rack up all those minutes on my cell." "You actually listened to her?" Jonah wanted to scream. Instead, he squeezed his eyes shut. "Stay calm," he ordered himself. "Your parents," he began slowly, "if they don't want to talk about you being adopted, do you think they might have deleted those files? Do you think if maybe you go ask them?" "My parents never look at my computer," Chip said bitterly. "They don't care. The only people who knew about those files were you and Catherine and me, and I didn't tell anyone. Did you? Did Catherine?" "No," Jonah said automatically, but he still had his eyes squeezed shut, as if he had his memory displayed on the backs of his eyelids. He could see his own hands sweeping across a page, writing out, "All the information is on Chip's computer in the basement at his house." "Oh no," Jonah said. His eyes sprang open again, and he caught a glimpse of his own stricken expression in his parents' dresser mirror. The note I left for my parents when we went to the library, just in case something happened." "Did they read it?" Chip asked, horrified. "You think they came over and erased my computer files? Would they do that?" "No." But Jonah took the phone and rushed down the hall to his own room. The note was still hidden in the top drawer of his desk, right beside the mysterious letter, "Beware, they're coming back to get you." He thought about the casual way Dad had shouted up the stairs about the phone call. Dad hadn't seen this note. And Mom was still out running errands. She hadn't seen it either. Then, he remembered the man at the library, struggling under the table as Jonah scrambled out the window. "Go, Jonah, hurry! And Jonah, I saw your note. You have to be careful. Careful where you leave anything that could be seen later, anything that could be monitored." "Oh no," Jonah moaned. "It was one of them." Them who? But Jonah was peering suspiciously around his room. It looked like usual, the NBA poster a little crooked on the wall, the blue bedspread slightly rumpled, the closet door open a crack with his shoes half in and half out. It was all so familiar, but it had been invaded at least twice now that he knew of. The very air seemed to crackle with danger. Except, was it really dangerous right this minute? If people could just appear anywhere they wanted, and he was still trying to get his mind around that idea, why didn't someone just grab him now? Why hadn't they taken him back with the plane, or during any one of those thousands of seconds of his life since then? Maybe time travel wasn't so easy. Be careful. Careful where you leave anything that could be seen later. Anything that could be monitored. Seen later. Monitored. Maybe the next word after that would have been later too. Maybe, if time travel even existed, there were limits to it. Maybe it was something about the rotation of the Earth, or sunspots, or something bizarre like that. So anything written down was dangerous, because it could be seen at any time. And other things that could be monitored, were cell phone pictures, computer hard drives, and Jonah gasped. Chip, I can't tell you anything right now, not over the phone. Why not? Chip demanded. This is crazy. You're starting to sound like Angela. What if Angela's right? Alright, so that is where we're going to stop today. It's starting to get really good, and I cannot wait to keep reading with you guys. So stay tuned for my video tomorrow, and we will continue and see maybe Angela is right. Bye, guys.